like, well, God, I feel like I'm still getting there with some of this. Like, and we'll always have these areas in our life, but I don't quite have this yet, or I can see this area of brokenness, or I can see this gap. But I feel like as I'm getting the chance to speak it out, it's like God's holding me more accountable. He's like, yeah, but will you speak it out and be more accountable to this? So even that's a little bit of a challenge to us. Sometimes we can hear that do first and then teach and think we've got to master everything and be fully on the other side. But also think as we give stuff out, God just makes it more tangible and more solid in our lives. And then there's this thing of accountability where it's like, all right, I've been telling a lot of people this is what I think God is like in this area, and that therefore you guys know that I think this way, and how can I be held accountable to living like this, and doing my relationships this way. So I was really privileged to go to the Thailand gathering, I think it was last month, and what it was you guys heard us mention it, but it's YWAM Together, and it was a gathering of I think almost 4,000 YWAMers from around the world. And because it was in Thailand, there were all these YWAMers who were usually never able to get to one of these gatherings because of visas or money or whatever. And so my little quote to it was I was meeting people from nations that I forgot existed. Like I'm from, I don't know if I met somebody from Bhutan, but that's my best example. Like, I'm from Bhutan, and I'm like, I forgot that was a country. Like, good on you for serving away there. And so there's a lot of moments like that, but it's such a special gathering. But I went into it just committed to go because I thought, like I always go to these gatherings. I love being reminded how international YWAM is. And we're so privileged to be part of YWAM Australia. You find as you travel and you interact with other centers around the world, you're like, oh, we have something really special here and really unique here, and actually not everywhere functions like us. And we're actually really privileged to be a part of Do YWAM in this part of the world. But I love being reminded of our international family. And so I went into it expecting, I'm like, oh, I know how these things go. You meet all these people, and you get to rekindle all these relationships with people, you see only once every couple years. Or like one of the translators from when I led a team to Thailand in 2013 with Amelia, one of our translators from that tiny little town, that Royet, Selapum thing, which nobody ever goes there. This guy's like, I know you. I'm like, oh, your mind's racing the whole time. Like, how do I know you? It could be 10, 100 different ways. It's like, I was your translator. And like, wow, everybody was there. But I was expecting that we would hear a lot about Bible distribution, which we always do at these YWAM gatherings, and it's awesome. And I was like, all right, I'm ready to hear about how there's these unreached people groups who don't have the Bible yet, and how am I ready to commit to pray or be involved in some way of seeing these nations get the Word of God. And I'm like, yep, that's great. When we get in, and that absolutely was covered and was a big part of the event, but the first couple days, they were talking about us as a family, and they were talking about us in our relationships, and they were talking about how do we love each other, and is there offense between us, and how are we running our centers, like where are our relationships at, and I was really struck by that because I thought, man, like if I were to gather, 4,000 YWAMers from around the world, what would I say? What would I think would be the most important thing to impart? And it was very noteworthy to me that the most important thing they felt to impart was this starting of this foundation of oneness. Are we for each other? Are we working on our relationships with each other? Do we actually see this as foundational, as important, as pivotal to what God is doing in the mission? And when Darlene Cunningham got up and spoke, she embodies speaking the truth in love. Like she is it to me of how to do that. And she said this quote, and I'm paraphrasing, I don't remember exactly, but it was something along the lines of that our broken relationships can actually hinder the vision. And I think I knew that somewhere, and maybe whatever percentage of you in this room could say, oh yeah, I know that. I feel like in theory we know that, and we can find a lot of supporting verses in the Bible for this, but there's something about, we have these moments where it's like suddenly something clicks, and I have a way of saying it now where I'm like, I can't always explain why. I can't tell you why it was her statement and not 10 DTS lectures of of comments on this. Like, I don't know why it was this statement, but it was something clicked in me, and I'm like, man, I've never heard it so simple and so black and white. Because I think somewhere in me, I've always just ranked it as like, okay, we have the vision, and the vision is like the overarching, like, what are we doing? Where are we going? What's up ahead? And then below it, somewhere on this totem pole, we've learned, you'll learn if you already are learning or would know this, our Western thinking, we're very linear in how we think. And so we're very like, well, this leads to this, or this is higher than this, and this is down here. And then when you start to travel to the Middle East or get into other Asian cultures and all that, you find that there's this like circular way of thinking, and there is a way where it's like, and it's this, and it's this, and it's this, and it's this, and they're all kind of, but in my very Western way of thinking, I'm like, okay, well, here's the vision, and then somewhere down here, I couldn't tell you exactly where, is where relationships go, and it's important, but like, at the end of the day, it's really about what we get done for the Lord. And I probably would have never stood up and shared that in front of people or anything like that. You know, we have these like subconscious beliefs in our heart, and we're like, I don't think I would teach that, but I definitely live out of that at times, or like I think that somewhere in me. And so there's something about this black and whiteness of that, and I'm like, oh wow, okay, it can actually hinder the vision. And I don't think it's that God won't bless things. Like, we serve a really gracious God, and he's so committed to us, and he says his gifts and his calling are irrevocable. So actually we can go for a while in either our own strength or with the vision, with the plans, with the agenda. And we can run for a bit sometimes, even if things are kind of like falling around a little bit around us, or the people, aspect in our life is crumbling a little bit. Because God isn't, it's not that, things don't go well and God suddenly, it's like a switch flips and it's like, okay, yeah, well now my blessing is removed. Like, God doesn't do that. But I still think that there is something, and I'm saying I'm growing in belief in this, that God's not gonna, let me actually get the exact quote. I just think God doesn't really continue to bless things outside of relationship. And the reason for that being, we're told in the Bible that this is how the world is going to know what he's like. And so it says, this is how they're going to know that you're my disciples, is they're going to watch the way that you love each other. And it's not going to be because you built the best buildings or because you run the most organized setup, or because your accounts are perfect, or all these things, of course, matter deeply, but you can do that and not know Jesus. And we can do a lot of things and not know Jesus, because there's still truths that we can walk out in. You cannot know the Lord and walk in truth. But we have this difference with the kingdom of God, where it says they're going to know that you're actually followers of Jesus. It's going to differentiate you. It's going to set you apart. You're going to be a businessman. That people are going to know you love Jesus. You're going to be a hairdresser. People know you love Jesus. You're going to be a YWAMer, and people are going to know that your team loves Jesus because of how you love each other. And I think, I know the reason for that is because in the kingdom of God, we've been given the way. We have something that the world absolutely doesn't have. They can create incredible accounting systems. They can create amazing boats that go ships and go a lot of places and do a lot of things. But they can't create the unconditional love of God that grounds us, that we can come back to. They can't create the ability to lay our burdens at the feet of Jesus and receive the grace and the power of the Lord to forgive. They can't create the ability to receive from the Lord a word of wisdom that lets us know what we wouldn't actually know just in the practical or in the physical, and get the word that we need to move forward on in a relationship with somebody and see breakthrough. Like, we have access to the love of God, and it says this is love, not that we love God, but that he loved us. So we have access to this love of the Lord, and so therefore he's like, okay, I loved you first. I did this first in your life. Therefore, this is what it looks like for you to serve me, is that you love other people, and other people are going to see this, and this is going to move forward the vision. So David's going to be bringing some specifics about this, and I really like the way he worded it. If he's saying, what does it take to make room for the vision? So you guys might have come in thinking like, oh, we're going to talk about Tali, and we're going to talk about the ship ministry, and we're going to talk about the 10, 20 years. The more I work with David, I'm always like joking with David. I'm like, David, you're there 5, like 10 plus 50 years ahead in the future. You're like in this like, the specific detail of, he's very detailed and very like way in the future. And we're going to talk about the vision, and you might have thought, okay, I know what that entails. Like, I know what that means. I know what talking about the vision is. We're gonna talk about commitments, or we're gonna talk about what needs to get done, or what people need to be in place. Kind of like I went to YWAM together, and I'm like, I know what this is going to be. We're going to talk about Bible distribution, and I'm going to pray about an unreached people group that I didn't know existed, and I'm going to ask for Bibles to go there. But what we wanted to start with, and I felt like, what we wanted to start with was this emphasis on our family, on our relationships, on each other. How do we see each other? What work are we willing to put into our relationships with each other? Do we see it as, and to be honest, I don't actually 100% know. I still want to do more reading on this or study or whatever. I don't know exactly if it does get ranked, how that works. But do we see this as pivotal, like absolutely pivotal to what the Lord wants to do in the future? So when David talks about making room for the vision, what does that look like to make room for the vision in your heart? And are you thinking in practicals? Are we thinking, I'm very implicational in how I think. Am I thinking in terms of like I get to details, I'm like, well, who's gonna cut the grass? Like, who's gonna get the, like, I think very practically. But what does it look like to make room for the vision, guys? And it was make room that no matter what the lists are, what part of it, those are all important, but part of it is going to be is where's my heart at with the people in this room? Where's my heart at with knowing what God thinks about me and how I relate, and how and growing in the belief that we might actually hinder the vision if the vision of our own lives. We're always like, God, what's your purpose for me? What can I lead out in? What influence do you have for me? But we might actually hinder the vision in our own lives, determined by our love for one another. And I don't find that to be heavy at all. The more that I'm grabbing hold of that, I'm like, that is the best, it's like some of the best news to me. Because something, like, we were created for relationships, so something in me is like, that's kind of actually how I hoped it was going to be. Like, I've hoped that it would actually matter that much. Like, I've hoped that it would, I've hoped that my relationships, or my work in that area, because it does take work, guys, actually, but like my efforts in that area are actually super, super important at the end of the day. And when you're at the end of the day and you're kind of evaluating, like, what did I get done? What did I accomplish? What did I miss out on? That these things carry so much weight. And to me, it actually brings so much life. I'm like, yes, how good is God that He's done it this way. He's created frameworks this way. Matt Dawson has a quote that I've always really loved, and he's like, God won't let us build a structure that can exist without love. And that one's always resonated through me. I'm like, wow, okay. Like, or I don't know, I think he'll let us. It won't let it continue to exist. Because again, anybody can do that. Anybody in the world can have an awesome warehouse and can do, not anybody, that's not true, but like with the right skill sets, with the right determination, all that stuff, we can do a lot of things. But it actually says, I'll always come back to this chapter, and it's like, for the rest of my life, I think God's gonna continue to unpack this chapter in my life. It's like, guys, we can speak in the tongue of men and angels. We can have faith that moves mountains. We can give everything we have to the poor and surrender our body to the flames. But without love, it actually doesn't mean anything. And so it's as we look at the vision, as we move forward, as we consider what God is doing in our community and your personal part in that. I guess I'm setting us up, and I'm doing this in my own life absolutely right now, is to have this piece carry a huge, huge weight in this. And this to be, I'm speaking it out, so sometimes we don't, like, God can speak anything, but it's like sometimes when we hear that provocation from the front or from wherever, it's like it unlocks something so God can speak those things. We hear him, like maybe it's something we wouldn't have been able to hear him in before because we're kind of locked in to like, oh, but it has to look like this, or this is how God's going to speak to me about this. But bringing this strong piece that might be the thing that God really emphasizes to you over this annual retreat. And he's like, man, grab hold of this and see how I unlock the vision and place you and grow purpose and make you just, the dreams that you have in your heart come about. I also want to emphasize with this, I want to emphasize with this that these are things that we learn. I know in my life I've thought a lot that it's like, oh, you kind of either have this or you don't, or that, and I would say, that I have like a natural bend towards things, and like that's the way it's always going to be. Like this is just kind of how I am. And I really want to emphasize with this that these things are learned, and we all come from different family backgrounds. We've all had different, strong influences in our life that have really shaped how we relate to one another. And I think I've just been shocked in my own life. I'm like, oh my gosh, there's so much to learn. There's so much to learn. And we naturally go into these like tendencies, and you can study all this stuff and look into it, but most of us kind of fall into these categories where when we're under stress or we're hurt, we're in having like a broken time with disconnect with somebody, we tend to either go into like blaming everybody else, blaming yourself, or those be like the two things. We tend to be like, everything is someone else's fault or everything is my fault. And that will dictate sort of how we respond to like what action plan we make with that person. And the other sort of categories that we fall into is we either like fight, this is what we do, our stress reactions, either fight, flight, or freeze. And it's helpful to know these generalizations because we default into this stuff, but it actually can be unlearned. So in myself, over the years, I'm like a pull back a little bit, where I'm like, I've shared this with you guys, I'm very like, everything is my fault. So I'm like, go very internal. And then it goes, I think in order to keep the peace in relationship, it's like, okay, well, in order to protect this relationship, I need to pull back and I need to keep quiet and I need to like just work it out on my own. And until God brought a better way of thinking in, I was like pretty locked into that way of thinking. I'm like, this is my default. It's like, this is just who I am. This is how I keep peace. But I can tell you with full confidence that God changes, like he can teach us and he can change us. And actually in this room is the capacity to change. Like we have the people in this room needed to be able to draw those things out and actually get better at it. And I've been so inspired by some of you guys, like learning so much from some of you guys who are having some really hard conversations right now and like doing the work, going to the Lord, figuring out what you're going to say, seeking counsel on it and being so courageous. I've actually had my own heart realigned in some things through watching some of you guys 10 years younger than me, walk through some tricky things. And I'm like, man, God, what a gift to be able to be around this. What a gift to see a different way of doing things. What a gift to be sharpened in this. We could unpack that forever, and I'm not going to right now. But I really want to, as a piece to this, know that this can be learned. So as you hear God on this, and as he speaks into this area of our community, know that if you think like, oh, I've got a default, like, God actually has a better way. And I'm learning as well that we don't change. I'm pretty convinced we don't change until we believe there's a better way. And so God is always wanting to just like bring in like, oh, there's a better way. And I would say the journey over this stuff that I'm talking about. So I'm like, oh, I've just been so just in awe of the Lord that there's better, that there's more. So I wanted to finish up on a quote. There's like a quote and a story from a book that I read. And to me, it's been one of the, like, it's a little bit about confrontation, a little bit about the, like, leaning forward into relationship, but leaning forward in love and leaning forward in a way that, because some of you guys are really good at leaning forward. Some of you guys are really quick to dive in, and then it needs that, like, tempering of, like, okay, well, how do I do this in love? And some, like me, need to learn how to, like, step in more. But there's this book that I was reading when I was over in the Middle East, and I've been obsessed with it. And it's called Tattoos on the Heart and the Powers of Boundless Compassion. And it's written by this Jesuit priest. And he did this long-running ministry with gang members in Los Angeles, and it's called Homeboy International or something. And yeah, they have like a bakery, and they have a screen printing shop, and they have a tattoo removal ministry. And so this book is just all these stories of him working with these gang members. And it's beautiful. And he tells us one story, and it's in this chapter called The Slow Work of God. And he's telling the story about this one guy that he's been working with. And this guy was on drugs and all that, and he finally was able to, he kept offering him rehab and saying, like, I can help you, and this guy wouldn't take him up on it. And finally one day he took him up on it, got him into rehab, and while he was in rehab, his brother committed suicide. And so where it starts in the story is he's driving him back to the rehab center from the funeral. And he's like, man, like, what are we going to talk about in this car ride? Like, what do you say? This guy's like in recovery, finally has gone for it with recovery, and then this horrific thing happens. And as they get in the car, the guy he just dives in right away. And he's like, I had the craziest dream last night. And he's like, oh, what was the dream about? And he's like, I was in this dark room, and it was totally dark. But he's like, but somehow I knew you were in there with me. It's like this sense. And we both kind of like didn't really know what to do. But then you realize, he's talking like about the priest. He's like, you realized that you had a flashlight in your pocket. And so he's like, and then you pulled out the flashlight and you shined the flashlight onto a light switch on the wall. And he's like, and I knew I was the only one that could turn the light on. And so he's like, and I went over and I turned the light on. And he says, and did you know, he's like, the light is better than the darkness. And then the quote in there, the pastor or the priest, he goes, and he said it as if he had no idea, that like, this is the truth, like this is in the Bible, this is who God is. And he has this really beautiful quote that he wraps it up with, and he says, possessing flashlights and occasionally knowing where to aim them has to be enough for us. He says, fortunately, none of us can save anybody, but we all find ourselves in this dark, windowless room, fumbling for grace and flashlights. You aim the light this time, and I'll do it the next. The slow work of God, and you hope and you wait for the light, this astonishing light. And I really, that's really framed. Actually, I'll read that one part one more time. It says, we all find ourselves in this dark, windowless room, fumbling for grace and flashlights. You aim the light this time, and I'll do it the next. The slow work of God, and you hope and you wait for the light, this astonishing light. And that's been something just recently that has reframed another element of relationship for me. I'm like, gosh, what a beautiful picture that we need each other so, so, so much. And I love that picture that's like, sometimes I'm going to have the flashlight and I'm going to be able to point out something in your life. And hopefully, guys, I will have the courage. I will be in enough relationship with Jesus. I will value our relationship enough to pull the flashlight out at times and be like, hey, did you know you can turn the light on in this area of your life? And hopefully in return, you guys at different times in my life will be like, oh, actually, like, I've got the flashlight this time. Like, let me show you, let me help you turn the light on in your life. But man, imagine if we don't do that. Like if we back away from it. And if we don't do that in a way that's loving, that allows us to see the light, like the glorious light, the light that's better than the darkness, come on in our lives. And so I've been really inspired by this. It's provoking my own heart and how I relate. So yeah, I'll wrap it up there and let David come up and bring in those pieces, and we're just going to unpack this more. Guys, the question is, what is it going to take to make room for the vision? And I think there's a lot of beautiful things God is going to speak to us and already is speaking to us. David was so right. I'll quickly say this. David was so right in how he got these elders up in the front yesterday and was like, it's been long-term, committed, hard relationship, and I've been around for 13 years. I've seen some of the ups and downs those guys have gone through, and it's so awesome to see them testify to that. It's been a long, committed relationship, and look at the fruit. Yeah, I think that's it. All right, so I'll just pray for us, and then I'll pass it over to David.